In the cold northern edge of the Roman Empire, where the roads ended and the forests began, 5,000 Roman soldiers marched into history and then disappeared. No final battle report, no official explanation, no triumphant return to Rome, only silence. They were called Legio Nona Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion. For generations, they had fought under Rome's eagle. They had survived rebellions, ambushes, freezing campaigns, and some of the most brutal wars on the empire's frontier. But sometime in the early 2nd century, the trail of this legion goes dark. One year, their name is carved into stone. A few years later, they are gone. And the question has haunted historians ever since. What really happened to Rome's lost 9th Legion? Did they vanish in the mist-covered forests of northern Britain? Were they slaughtered by tribes Rome could never fully conquer? Were they secretly transferred to another frontier only to die far from the place where their legend was born? Or did Rome erase the truth because the loss was too humiliating to admit? This is not just the story of a missing army. It is the story of an empire that looked invincible, until the frontier swallowed one of its legions whole. To understand why the disappearance of the 9th mattered, you have to understand what a Roman legion really was. A legion was not just a group of soldiers. It was a machine. Thousands of trained infantrymen supported by cavalry, engineers, builders, scouts, medics, blacksmiths, and officers. A legion could march for days, build a fortified camp in hours, crush rebellions, construct roads, raise stone walls, and turn wild territory into Roman territory. Where a legion stood, Rome stood. Its eagle standard was sacred. Losing it was more than a military disaster. It was spiritual humiliation. For a Roman soldier, the eagle was not just a symbol. It was the soul of the legion. And the 9th had carried that soul across some of the most dangerous lands in the empire. Legio Nona Hispana had a long and violent history. It had served in earlier Roman wars, and by the time Rome invaded Britain in the year 43 AD, the 9th was part of the force that helped push imperial power across the island. But Britain was not like the Mediterranean provinces. It was colder, wetter, harder to control. Rome could conquer cities, build forts, and force local kings into submission. But beyond the roads and walls, there were forests, hills, marshes, and tribes who knew the land far better than any Roman commander. Britain was not simply conquered once. It had to be conquered again and again. And the 9th Legion would learn that lesson in blood. In the year 60 or 61 AD, the province exploded. The revolt was led by Boudica, queen of the Iceni, a woman whose name became one of the greatest nightmares in Roman Britain. Roman settlements were burned. Camulodunum, modern Colchester, was attacked. Londinium, modern London, was abandoned and destroyed. The rebellion spread with terrifying speed. When the 9th Legion marched to relieve Camulodunum, they were not walking into a normal battle. They were walking into a storm. The Roman commander, Petilius Cerealis, led part of the legion toward the city. But Boudica's forces intercepted them. The result was catastrophic. The infantry of the 9th was badly mauled. Roman foot soldiers were cut down. Only part of the cavalry escaped. For Rome, it was a warning. The 9th had not been destroyed, but it had been humiliated. And in the Roman military mind, that mattered. A legion could recover from losses, but reputation was harder to rebuild. Reinforcements came. The 9th survived. Rome eventually crushed Boudica's revolt. But the memory remained. The 9th had faced the fury of Britain once, and Britain had nearly broken it. That would not be the last time. Decades later, the 9th moved deeper into the north. Their base became Eboracum, modern York. At that time, York was not just another settlement. It was a strategic fortress, a military nerve center, and one of the most important Roman bases in Britain. From there, Rome looked north. Beyond the controlled province were lands that would later be associated with Caledonia, a region of fierce tribes, difficult terrain, and constant resistance. Roman commanders dreamed of pushing the frontier farther. They wanted maps to become roads, roads to become forts, forts to become cities, and cities to become Rome. But the north did not bend easily. The air was wet and cold. The distances were brutal. Supply lines stretched thin. Soldiers who had trained under Mediterranean suns now marched through mud, fog, and rain. Every hill could hide a scout. Every forest could hide an ambush. Every silence could be a trap. This was the world the Ninth Legion had to survive. And under the governor Gnaeus Julius Agricola, Rome launched a campaign into the far north. The empire wanted to finish the job. The Ninth would again be placed in danger. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us of a moment that sounds almost cinematic. During Agricola's campaigns in the north, the Roman army was divided. The Caledonians saw an opportunity. Instead of waiting for a formal battle, they struck at night. Their target was the Ninth Legion. Tacitus describes the Ninth as vulnerable, and the enemy chose them for that reason. Imagine the scene. A Roman camp in hostile territory, rain on leather tents, sentries fighting sleep, torches burning low. Beyond the perimeter, shapes moving in the darkness. Then the attack comes. Not in neat lines, not with Roman discipline, but suddenly, violently, from the dark. The Caledonians cut through the sentries and burst into the camp. Roman soldiers woke to screams, smoke, confusion, and blades. The camp, usually a symbol of order, became chaos. For a Roman legionary, night was dangerous because it destroyed the thing Rome depended on most: formation. In daylight, a legion was a wall of shields. At night, in a broken camp, soldiers became isolated men. Tacitus says Agricola moved quickly and sent help. The Ninth was not destroyed that night. It survived. But survival is not the same as victory. The attack showed something Rome did not like to admit. Even a legion could be vulnerable. Even disciplined Roman soldiers could be caught off guard. And the Ninth, once again, had been close to disaster. After decades of war, blood, and rebuilding, the Ninth appears again in the archaeological record. This time, not in a battle story, in stone. At York, an inscription records work done under Emperor Trajan. The stone is dated to 107 or 1078 AD. It says that a gateway was built through the agency of the Ninth Legion Hispana. That stone matters, because it is one of the last solid signs of the Ninth in Britain. No legend, no campfire tale, no medieval fantasy. A stone, a date, a name. The Ninth was there. The Legion was still real, still organized, still working for Rome, still carving its presence into the northern frontier. And then, after that, the evidence becomes thin, too thin. This is where the mystery begins. Because in a military empire as bureaucratic as Rome, legions usually leave traces: inscriptions, diplomas, tombstones, tiles, altars, records of officers, mentions in campaigns, evidence of where they were stationed. But for the Ninth, the trail becomes uncertain. Not immediately invisible, but uncertain enough that historians still argue about it nearly 2,000 years later. And that is what makes the Ninth so fascinating. It did not vanish from the battlefield in one dramatic scene we can prove. It vanished from certainty. In the year 117 AD, Hadrian became emperor. Hadrian was not like some emperors before him. He was not obsessed with endless expansion. He wanted consolidation, borders, control, a defensible empire, and nowhere was that more necessary than Britain. By the year 122 AD, Hadrian ordered the construction of what would become one of Rome's most famous frontier monuments, Hadrian's Wall. Stretching across northern Britain from coast to coast, the wall was more than a barrier. It was a statement. Rome was drawing a line. On one side, the province. On the other, the unconquered north. But here is the strange part. When Hadrian's Wall begins to rise, the Ninth Legion is not clearly there as one of the legions building its future into stone. Other Roman forces appear. The imperial frontier changes. The military map of Britain shifts. And the Ninth, once stationed in the north, once central to Roman Britain, is missing from the clear record. A legion that had fought, built, bled, and survived in Britain for decades seems to step out of the light. The silence becomes louder. Where did they go? The most famous theory is also the darkest. The Ninth Legion was destroyed in Britain. Perhaps in the north, perhaps during a major uprising, perhaps in the years around Hadrian's arrival when the frontier was unstable and Rome was reorganizing its defenses. In this version, the Ninth marched into hostile territory and never returned as a functioning legion. The image is powerful. Roman soldiers moving through mist, shields wet with rain, the eagle standard carried at the center, the road narrowing, the forest closing around them. Then the first arrows, a horn in the distance, orders shouted in Latin, the calm breaking, the enemy attacking from the hills, from the trees, from the fog. For Rome, this would have been a nightmare. Not just the loss of men, the loss of prestige, the loss of the eagle, the proof that the empire could bleed. Some modern scholars argue that war and heavy Roman losses in Britain around the time of Hadrian may explain the disappearance or disbanding of the Ninth. This theory fits the legend. It fits the atmosphere. It fits the silence. But history is not only about what feels right. It is about evidence. And the evidence is complicated. Another possibility is less cinematic but historically serious. Maybe the Ninth was not destroyed in Britain at all. Maybe it was transferred. Rome moved legions constantly. A crisis on one frontier could pull troops from another. A legion stationed in Britain could be sent to the Rhine, the Danube, or the East. There is evidence suggesting at least some connection between the Ninth and places outside Britain, including the region of Nijmegen in the modern Netherlands. This opens another possibility. The Ninth may have left Britain, continued service elsewhere, and disappeared later in another conflict or through administrative disbandment. That would mean the famous image of the legion vanishing into Scottish mist might be more legend than fact. But this theory has its own problem. If the entire legion survived long after Britain, why does the evidence remain so limited? Why does the record not clearly show its later life? Why does its name not continue with the same certainty as other Roman legions? Maybe only detachments moved. Maybe the legion was weakened. Maybe it was transferred, reduced, merged, or quietly disbanded after losses. Rome did not always announce failure. Sometimes an army could disappear, not in one massacre, but through paperwork, reassignment, and silence. And for a modern storyteller, that may be even more unsettling. A legion does not need to die in one day to vanish. It can be erased slowly. Rome was a civilization of monuments. Victories were carved into stone. Triumphs were paraded through the capital. Enemies were shown defeated, chained, kneeling beneath the emperor's power. But defeats were different. Rome remembered some disasters, of course. Teutoburg Forest, Cannae, Carrhae. But imperial image mattered. A lost legion could shake confidence. It could encourage enemies. It could embarrass commanders. It could stain an emperor's reign. So if the Ninth was destroyed, Rome had reasons not to turn that destruction into public memory. And if the Ninth was not destroyed, but reduced, transferred, or disbanded, Rome still had little reason to preserve the story. The empire was not interested in every ending. Only useful endings. That may be why the Ninth became a mystery. Not because nothing happened, but because whatever happened was not preserved in a way that survived. History often feels like a book, but it is more like a ruined wall. Some stones remain, others are missing. And between the stones, we imagine the shape of what once stood there. For Legio Nona Hispana, we have enough stones to know they existed, enough to know they fought, enough to know they suffered, enough to know they stood at the edge of Roman Britain, but not enough to know their final chapter. It is easy to speak of the Ninth as a unit, a legion, a number, a military formation. But behind that number were men. A young recruit who had never seen Britain before, a veteran who had survived Boudica's revolt, a centurion with scars across his face, A standard-bearer who knew that if the eagle fell, he was expected to die before abandoning it. Engineers who built gates in York. Soldiers who wrote letters home. Men who stood guard in freezing rain and wondered whether Rome even remembered them. Some may have dreamed of returning to warmer provinces. Some may have taken local partners. Some may have had children near the forts. Some may have died unnamed in the mud of a northern road. When we ask what happened to the Ninth Legion, we are not only asking about strategy. We are asking what happened to thousands of lives that the record barely preserves. That is the real power of the mystery. Not just that a legion disappeared, but that so many human endings were swallowed by silence. No graves we can confidently name as their final resting place. No complete list of the dead. No final speech. No surviving soldier telling us, "I was there." Only fragments. A stone in York. A historian's account of an earlier attack. Traces beyond Britain. And the shadow of an army that should have left more behind. So what is the most likely answer? The honest answer is this. We do not know. But we can say what the evidence suggests. The Ninth Legion was definitely active in Roman Britain. It suffered major losses during Boudica's revolt, but survived. It was attacked during Agricola's northern campaigns, but survived again. It was present at York in 107 or 108 AD. After that, its story becomes unclear. Some evidence may point to movement or detachments outside Britain. Some scholars argue that the legion may have met its end or been disbanded after serious conflict in Britain around the early 120s AD. The legend says they marched north and vanished. The evidence says something more precise, but no less haunting. After serving Rome for generations, the Ninth Legion reached the edge of the empire, and then disappeared from the record. Maybe they died in battle. Maybe they were transferred and broken elsewhere. Maybe they were disbanded after losses Rome preferred not to celebrate. But whatever happened, their ending was not carved with the same confidence as their service. And that is why the Ninth still echoes. Because empires are built on certainty, on maps, on laws, on roads, on stone. But here, at the edge of Rome's world, certainty fails. A legion marched under the eagle. A gate was built in York. A wall rose across Britain. And somewhere between those events, the Ninth was gone. 2,000 years later, the question remains. What happened to the lost Ninth Legion? The answer may still be buried beneath a field, hidden under a ruined fort, or scattered across inscriptions not yet found. Or maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe the empire that recorded so many victories simply chose not to remember this defeat. But history has a way of keeping its ghosts alive. And among Rome's ghosts, few are darker than this. 5,000 soldiers, one sacred eagle, and a legion that vanished without a trace. This was Tri-Echoes. Some stories do not end. They echo.